Hi, everyone. I'm actually, before I introduce, I think it's really interesting, and I did write that bio. The word build was in there so frequently. We were actually just talking right before this about inclusive language in job descriptions. And there is, conversations around how women are less likely to apply to a job if within the job description, the word build is in there, but men are. But when you have the word create, both will apply. So I think that I have some editing to do on my own personal bio. So I'm really, really glad to be moderating this panel today. First of all, I'm just so excited that we're able to be having this kind of conversation in this venue. For those of you who've been in this industry for a while or just have existed for a while, this is not really something that we talk about a lot. We give room to, we give space to, and a relatively large space at that. So I'm really, really pleased that this exists. And I'm really pleased that y'all are here with me. So with that, I would love to introduce our panelists. So next to me is Megan Winter. She is Chief of Staff at Embrace. We also have Pooja Malpani, Head of Engineering at Bloomberg Media. And then Emilio Escobar, he is Chief Information Security Officer at Datadog, and he is also the executive sponsor for our Latinx Community Guild, which is what we refer to as employee resource groups. So I think we should just get started. Really excited.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So I did kind of launch a new question on you that you weren't prepared. I did give them like a 5-minute preparation, but I really was interested to talk through, we're here at Dash. We're representing companies across the tech industry. And we know that the tech industry really values innovation, creativity, problem solving, but it's also an industry that has historically excluded a lot of people and a lot of demographics that are represented on this panel here. So I was curious to ask, what changes have you seen in the industry throughout your career, and what are you hoping to see change in the future?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. So I'm relatively new to, I'm much younger than some of the folks in this room. No, you look fabulous, Pooja. I'm not trying to jab here. But when I started in tech sales, and obviously that's male dominated. I'm a female. And when I was switching jobs, I was interviewing a bunch of places. And towards one of my final interviews, they had already offered me the position, and they asked, do you have any reservations or concerns about joining our team? I said, you know what? I don't see a single female leader on your board or anywhere listed on your website leading the team. And that's a huge concern because I can't see myself represented there. And when I look at that company now, they have a bunch of female leaders there. So I don't know if I sparked something, but I'm seeing a lot of leadership now, especially females, kind of take those types of positions at Embrace. I'm really lucky to say that we have half women on our exec team. So I see that shift happen within at least technology industry itself.
Yeah, that's incredible. There's, a famous saying, if you can't see it, you can't be it. That's really the value of representation and seeing it there. And, I do agree, we are making those marginal improvements or, incremental movements towards improvement in that space, but there's still so much room to go. We know there's so much talent there. We know there's so much untapped resources and, different experiences, but curious, Emilio or Pooja, your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think I'll divide my career into two parts. The first 10 years, I've been in tech for 20 years now, over 20 years. The first 10 years were definitely worse than the more recent 10 years. I've seen, even 20 years ago, I had the same problem, which was, I remember one of my first interviews, six or seven interview rounds, not a single male interviewer, or rather the other way around. All male interviewers, not a single female interviewer. The only female I saw that day was the receptionist, the person in the lobby. And nobody asked me if I wanted a restroom break. And I don't know why at the time I didn't want to ask my interviewer where the restroom was. And so when I had a 15-minute break between interviews, I stepped out of the conference room, stepped out of the door to go to the reception where I couldn't get in if without a badge, to ask the receptionist where the restroom was. And once I joined, I gave this feedback to my manager, the director. And his solution was, okay, you will be now on every interview. interview loop. And at the time, I remember reacting to it as, oh, he listened, he cared. And then quickly that was not sustainable, but there weren't many other females. Things have definitely improved. The last, like I said, the more recent 10 years look better. I don't see half the members of my executive team as women, so I think it's pretty amazing that it's that way. But I definitely envision a future where that trend is becoming more real, I guess. So hopefully the next 10 years will be better than the most recent 10 years.
Yeah, I think for me is been in tech for a long time. There are some improvements, as we've heard. I think we all can relate. A couple of years back, women's role in the tech conference was very different than what it is now, and we all know what it is, and not going to get into it. So I'm glad to see a lot of women joining leadership positions, and actually not just leadership, but having active participation in conferences as well, presenting demos, talking about architecture when it comes to tech and things like that. So I think it's amazing. When I started being a Latino person, not only yes, I'm a male in tech, so it's pretty common. But the first questions I will get asked is mostly around like, why are you here? Not necessarily like, oh, where you're a candidate. So that's been and a lot of improvements. But I still think we have a lot of work to do, right? So tech conferences is the only conference where a guy actually has to wait to use the restroom. Anywhere else you go is the other way around. And that's my measure of how diverse we are. So we still have a lot of, right? I walked out of the keynote and saw and noticed it's like, yeah, we still have a lot of work to do. So I'm glad things are changing. So hopefully in a couple of years, it will be much better.
And on the plus side, we don't have to wait.
Yeah, I was jokingly telling Amelia earlier that I feel like I have my private restroom on my floor. Not a good thing.
Yeah. And just another funny way it showed up is when I was getting mic'd, I'm wearing a jumpsuit and it has pockets. And the women in the audience are like, ooh, yeah, pockets. But also the person who's micing me up was like, women always have those fake pockets. It makes it so hard. And I was like, it's hard for you. It's hard for us to exist with fake pockets. I appreciate that it's hard for your job, but try to, live your life. So it's spreading the gospel. This jumpsuit has pockets. So it's a big win. So, as part of underrepresented groups, we often are taking on the work of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, because we personally get how important it is. So what has that looked like for each of you as you've grown in your career? And especially now as leaders, where you're in these positions of power and privilege to really influence and drive change?
Yeah. So fun fact, I used to work at Datadog before I came to Embrace. And what they did really cool there was they had like a women's lunch every month that I really liked. And so when I started at Embrace, I brought that along, or when I started Embrace, I brought that along to our company. And I just really like that because we are a smaller team. And so it went from like 3 women and now we have like 20 plus women that come every month to the lunch. So that's fun. It's a small initiative. Embrace is a 100-person company. So we don't have the big budgets to incorporate all these different things because they'd be like 4 people there, 5 people there. But what we do as a company is try to give people basically ownership to make an impact. That's why I joined a startup, was to create impact. And our leadership team is awesome to respond to that and allowing people to kind of take on what they can and then grow into their responsibility there. So that's kind of how we're empowering, but kind of copycatted something from Datadog to take along for the ride.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah. Fun lunches.
We do love a lunch and
I think we've had a pocket conversation before.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I agree with what you said about we end up championing diversity because we are in the underrepresented group. But I also will often say that the onus of diversity should not fall on the diverse, and it often ends up being the case that. As an example, in my group, I will see that there's a lot more recruitment efforts being done by the few people that we have in the Hispanic community or the Black community or the women. And on one hand, it's useful. I can see why they get tapped on for doing panels, career fairs, etc. But on the other hand, we also want to spread the load and create the awareness. I have a DEI committee, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and the committee is rotating. So every quarter we have six engineers join that, and they get to spend 20% of their capacity towards DEI initiatives. And the goal is that eventually everybody, will have taken a turn. And I really like that model because there are people who are like, I don't know what to do. Well, that's why you should go join and figure out. And hopefully, even if it's the same team, you get a diverse set of ideas to pursue. And we've had some amazing initiatives come out of that result, including, and they treat it like any other project, right? So this is not something that you do on the side after all your important P1 projects are done. This is given the same treatment. So they have a Jira board, they follow Scrum, and they have tasks, and then they do retros. So it's given the same gravitas as any other project. And some things that have come out of it include they did a DEI-thon, like a hackathon focused on DEI, where they tried to remove non-inclusive terminology and provided some mapping. And now they've gamified it, and so there's a scoreboard, and everybody's going and trying to get their scores closer to 100%. And so it's become a little bit more fun, and hopefully we'll see a lot more come out of that group that resonates with the wider community. And so I'm constantly thinking of ways to make this be more accessible to non-diverse population as well. And this become a problem that everybody wants to solve as opposed to the onus of diversity falling on the diverse.
Yeah. I agree. I think being a diverse person, maybe we're maybe a little bit more sensitive to it, right? Because we see the problem, we feel the problem, and we can speak up. So I like the idea of sharing the load. I many years ago, I worked at NSA, where there are probably around 2,000 Puerto Ricans who work there. So every time I will speak up and say, hey, I'm Emilio in Puerto Rico. Oh, you must know Jorge, right? And it's like, sure, because we all know each other, right? So it started even with that sarcastic attitude of just like, hey, no, and B, we're a lot. So just starting from there, now a lot of focus that I've been spending on diversity is a lot of leaders also blame recruiting, for example, for not having a proper pipeline of diverse candidates. I remember at Hulu, we pay really close attention to it. I remember this particular leader making a comment around well, if recruiting just did a better job. And I just, I'm a very patient person, but at that time, I think I just lost it in that meeting. It was like, well, your industry, where to tap into for talent. Maybe you should do more of an active role, right? And they actually took that feedback very well. I thought it was going to turn into a political match there, but it didn't. And then, luckily at Datadog, I have the luxury of and the privilege to help out the community guilds, starting with the Black in Tech and now the Latino Guild. So one of the things that I always talk to this group is diversity is very multifaceted, right? It's race, ethnicity, any type of identification that you can think of for a human. So a lot of the challenges that we go through is shared, right? So just because you're a CG or an ERG of X doesn't mean you shouldn't welcome others. And so I always talk about how we need to do more things together and how do we actually take notes and share notes and things like that. So that's been my big focus lately.
Yeah. So much that was covered in that. I mean, I think, that we're never just one thing, right? There's so much intersectionality. And when you are part of these marginalized groups and in these underrepresented groups, the value of allyship, which is usually the larger population, is huge. So how do you bring them in for the ride? How do you bring them on your journey? How do you, educate them to be an active ally? Because it's not a passive role. So appreciate those thoughts for sure. I think also in a similar vein, we often hear about the importance of mentorship and sponsorship for underrepresented people in their careers, especially as they're starting out. So curious how mentorship has played a role in your own career and how are you helping to put that forward for others in their own journeys?
Yeah, I'll start again. I feel like there's a good rhythm here. So Chief of Staff at Embrace, my role is it's kind of independent and siloed. I don't have a huge team. I work with the executive team to do strategic initiatives. And when I got into this role, I've never done chief of staff before, and I was trying to figure it out, and I was really searching for other people who have done it and looking for a mentor to kind of guide me. So I was just, kind of on LinkedIn, just trying to find someone. And luckily, chief of staff at Data Robot just said, hey, let's meet up. And I was in San Francisco, and Amy Hansen's awesome. And she's kind of been guiding me to different processes and different strategic initiatives she's worked on. And someone else had reached out to her, but she's obviously busy and can't mentor everybody. And so she passed me along to a woman who's going into a chief of staff role. And so I'm kind of mentoring her now and kind of passing the buck along. So I think it's just being, asking for help when you need it, and using people, even if you don't know them, and seeing, because people want to help at the end of the day, and then being, giving that back to someone who is also looking for help, and not saying, raising your hand and like, hey, I don't know anything. Can you help out? It's kind of my current relationship with mentorship, especially in this role. And I found some great people to help along the way.
It's incredible. Unreal.
Why don't we break the rhythm?
Yeah, damn it. So yeah, I agree. I think, we have, I think I've had mentors in different shapes or form throughout my career. Some of them not very explicit being my mentor. It's just a moment of lessons that they share with me in different experiences. So I run security for a company, and if there's anything difficult about security, is that there is no perfect security. So it is a very tough field to actually know whether you're doing the best or not, right? Because the best security you can do is just turn everything off and go home, and therefore you don't get hacked. So you have to find what's best for your organization. That means we're all making judgment calls, and our teams are making judgment calls. So relying on a network of peers and people that have gone through it has been amazing. So we all mentor each other, right? Because again, I don't think there's like a Gandalf of CISOs who knows everything, and we can all go up to that person and say, please, am I right? Second is I love to mentor new talent, right? People who want to get into tech, want to get into security in different forms, and I actually get mentored by the people who I mentor as well, which I love. And that comes from reviewing resumes. People would ask me like, hey, I'm applying for my first manager role. What sort of questions should I expect? And things like that. And it's like, hey, I'm not the know-it-all, but here's some of the things that I ask when I interview for my leadership roles, and things of that nature. So I will say find a mentor where you can, right? It doesn't always come with an official path. So even my wife mentors me a lot of times. Yeah.
She would probably say that's like an official role.
Yeah. So that's a mentor. If I don't listen to, I get in trouble.
As a boss.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Mentorship can take so many forms. I've seen it official, where it's a really structured relationship that's set up, and then the informal ones. And I think that, my advice is just always raise your hand for that opportunity. Always try to seek it whenever you can. Put yourself in those positions. Put yourself in that room whenever possible. Raise your hand for it. And if it pans into something that's amazing, if it didn't, at least you tried.
I think I find out is like people are actually willing to mentor more so than we think, because we think it's a burden, right, of the other person that we're asking.
Yeah.
If you actually run into somebody where that's a burden, then I think that's a clear sign that you don't want to interact with that person ever again, right? But I think naturally people want to help each other, and we're well intended. So find that for sure.
Yeah, everything you both said resonates with me. I'll just add that if you are looking for a mentorship, it has to be intentional. You have to be prepared. Sometimes I feel like people come to me for mentorship with the idea that I will just hear what this person has to say, and I will become smarter, or I will be successful.
That's not how it works.
And instead, if I think some more preparation, some more intentionality goes into it, you get a lot more for your time.
Yeah. Pooja, I'm actually going to stay with you because we often hear about how leaders talk about these successful moments and milestones in their careers, and how it's these really huge life lessons and so impactful. And less discussed, but I would say probably equally important, is the discussion around failure. So what lessons have you learned from failure in your own career, and how do you apply that to your current leadership approach?
What's that?
I
No, I'm
mean,
kidding. Yes, I've had my fair share of failures. I've brought down production. I don't have long legs, so I can't quite.
not that comfortable. Yeah.
And how many here are developers, by the way? Less than 50%. How many of you have brought production down? Ever caused a production incident? Almost the same number of hands. Sort of. Yeah. So I've done that. In the moment, it's felt awful. Right? It's very stressful. It really sucks. And sometimes it's my own doing. Sometimes it's something my team has done. Sometimes as a manager, I've signed them up for something and not been able to deliver, or just had to deal with the aftermath of a mess that was there. So in the moment, it's never been fun. It's been rather stressful, but never got fired. Never had to fire somebody because they made a mistake. And I'd say if I were to look back, my growth, my success has been a result of a lot of failures, things that didn't go well. And that was a moment to pause and figure out why didn't that go well? Was it just planning? Was it something else? What would I do differently next time? As a leader now, we have something called blameless postmortems, right? So when there's a production incident, when the incident's going on, as an example, the goal is everybody drops everything and tries to mitigate, and that's the culture in the group. And I think that's across many companies in the industry. But then after that, once the issue is resolved, you really want to come back and think about and do a blameless postmortem. And I keep saying blameless even internally because truly it's not about person X did blah and brought the system down. It's more about what guardrails should we have so that it's not easy to make this mistake again, and what kind of training do we need to offer, and really to go back and put those mitigations in such that the next person doesn't or there are at least few hurdles for them to make the same mistake. And outside of that, even if you think about what kind of risks are you taking, one way to not fail is to do the same thing you've been doing over and over again. And yeah, sure, you're not going to fail, but what's the growth in that? What are you learning? In fact, I'd say that if you're being presented with a problem that looks very much like the problem you have solved, perhaps you need to go seek a larger, something of a larger scope, different magnitude. And it's always good in my mind if there's excitement and a little bit of nervousness, right? Where you're like, this could fail, there's a little bit of risk. I was sharing this statistic with these folks earlier about this experiment that HP, Hewlett and Packard had done a few years back, where they put this job position out with a bunch of job requirements, and they found that men applied to it when they had 60% of the skills. And of course, this is not 100% men. None of these stats are 100%, but a good number of men applied to it when they had 60% of the skills, and women and other underrepresented groups applied to it when they had practically 100% of when they checked every little checkbox on that list. And this is telling you a little bit about the risk appetite. Very often, you lean in and take on something bigger than you have done in the past. You usually end up working hard and making that happen more often than not. And if you extrapolate that over somebody's career, that's a huge delta, right, between somebody who's taking those chances, who's raising their hand, and somebody who's not. And so, as a leader, my goal is to train other managers to be very mindful of, are you giving the opportunities to the same person? We use something called the golden boy, golden girl rule, where you have this star performer on your team, they've delivered things in the past, and so when you have a tough project, a fire drill, something critical, you go back to the same person, because as a manager, you don't want to fail your leadership. And therefore, this person does it, they get better, and it's this positive spiral, but you're not giving the opportunity to, others on your team. And there's a small chance of failure, which means that as a leader, I have to create the space where if that critical project fails, we have a culture of, psychological safety, and that people are allowed to stumble and still get other opportunities in the future. So I'm always trying to strike that balance between, yes, we want to be successful, we want to coach, but then we also want to have a culture of forgiveness and coaching.
Yeah, when we were chatting about it before, we were talking about the example of production. It was like, are you even an engineer if you haven't brought down production? It was just kind of like a rite of passage. So I appreciated that kind of thought process too. It's not necessarily like something that you want to encourage, but it is one of those things of it's kind of part of the process. And it's also, we are human, we are fallible. We're going to make those kinds of errors and learn from it, and hopefully in a safe space to grow from it. Sorry, Emilio. So at Datadog, you are the executive sponsor, as we said, for our Latinx Community Guild. And so I have the privilege of getting to work with you and seeing firsthand your passion and dedication to this employee group and their allies. And as tech organizations look to hire more diverse candidates, there's a lot of discussions, not just specifically around gender and race ethnicity diversity, but diversity of experience, and that's specifically non-traditional backgrounds. So what advice do you have for people who are looking to find new roles or break into the tech industry?
Yeah, talking about mentorship, I'm a member of this Latinx nonprofit group, and in the Slack, there's this channel talking about where people post around like jobs that they want to get and do they know anyone and things like that, and they always ask me, or not always, but when they ask me around a job position, whether they can qualify and things like that, I always get the sense that depending on your culture growing up, for a lot of minority cultures, there's a sense of like, just don't make a scene, don't make too much noise, right? Like, just get by. And I remember, my parents weren't necessarily like that, right? But there was a sense of, you don't want the attention on you, that kind of lesson. And you grow up with that. And I think I see that from a lot of the, I'm probably dating myself or aging myself with these kids, right? Where they want to get into a field. And they're afraid of even just applying for a role because they might not qualify or they might not meet like certain bullet points that are in the job description. And my feedback always to them is like, when you're looking for a job, if there's one moment in life where you need to make as much noise as possible, apply. If you're in a danger, that's definitely one of the moments. But talking about tech, is when you're applying for a job, right? Like that's when you want to put yourself out there. You want to get as many interviews as you can, because the more you do it, the better you get at it. And also, there's members of the HR team here. Like one of the things I always tell them, we don't do it at Datadog, but a lot of companies do this, is where job descriptions are actually written by the HR team, not the hiring managers. So a lot of bullet points there that the person writing it thinks are needed, that are basically space fillers at that point, right? So I always tell them, like, who cares? Just apply. Like, just apply for the role. And a couple of them have actually done it, and they didn't meet 50% of the list, and they still got the interview and they landed the job, right? So it's this is the moment where you just go out there, right? If the worst outcome is you get a no, you can live with that, right? But you know what? The more you try, there's a chance that you get a yes. So, but I always get that sense of reservation of people just don't want to make too much noise. It's like, well, this is when you sell yourself. You need to go out there. So that's usually the main advice that I give people.
I really like that. And I think that like when we think about, as members of underrepresented groups, like that's like probably highly uncomfortable. Like when you think about it, like, I am a child of immigrant parents. I remember my mother being like, just try and fit in. And I am like a 6 foot tall Asian woman. So I was like, I don't know that I can, it's not physically possible. So, I'm already uncomfortable even just trying to fit in. So why not just embrace the discomfort of being who I really am and taking up the space, making the noise, all of that stuff. And so I think that there's so much value in embracing the discomfort and claiming your space. If that sounds a little bit cheesy.
And I just work too. Like my wife is Taiwanese, and it plays out in her life too, where I don't know if anyone speak Mandarin, right? But they try to avoid being a mafan, right? They're trying to being a problem to somebody else. Like even with our neighbor, I have a problematic neighbor, and my wife didn't want to say anything. I'm like, say it, like, make yourself there. So yeah, it's interesting how minority groups just come up with that mindset. Yeah,
great. Megan. So you have experience working in sales, and you know firsthand what it's like to work in tech without being part of the engineering organization. And you also have this additional layer of being a woman working in these male-dominated industries. So can you speak about your experience and how it's influenced your own leadership style and approach?
Yeah. starting in tech sales, I started at Oracle, mostly guys. There's always been, especially like at larger companies, that boys club attitude, and you had to sell a certain way. Most of the managers were men, and they kind of taught you to sell a certain way. And for me, with that first year I started in sales, I thought I was going to like leave. I was like, I don't know if this is for me. Like it just felt not myself, like going against the grain. And I tried it, and I wasn't even doing well. And I was just trying it. And at a certain point, I just made a decision to kind of lean into more of who I am as a person, and tried that, and was more genuine into some of my qualities of leading with curiosity rather than trying to pitch someone, or trying to more understand with empathy versus trying to show you all of our product features, right? And the more I did that and authentically, the better of a response I got from not only prospects who I was selling to, but also my team and leadership. Like, I feel authenticity really carries across multiple platforms. And at the end of the day, like, you sell yourself, right? Like on a resume, as much as you can just be you, it's really cheesy to say, like, just be yourself. I think that carries a louder sound. And so as I moved into leadership, I carried that learning of curiosity and empathy when I would speak with leaders across departments of like, how are you doing this? How are you doing that? And then let's try to find a common ground. And it really shaped me up. I like sales, but I'm not in it now, so it's kind of nice. But it was something I really learned to just be authentically you, independent of your background. Just you come with a certain set of skills and specialness, and I think the more you lean into that, the more power you can drive across your team or in your life in general.
Yeah. After you had shared that as part of like kind of our pre-call where we were chatting, I mentor someone at Datadog who is in the sales team, and I shared it with him. Shout out to Joe if he's listening. I was just like, I just thought it was just really an interesting perspective. And he was like, absolutely. He was like, when I see successful women in sales, it's because they are genuine to who they are rather than trying to fit into the mold of what we think a salesperson is. And even that goes across genders, right? You know, it's challenging his own ideas of like, how do I be successful in sales being who I am? And maybe I don't, check XYZ or I look a certain way or whatever that is. And so I think it's really the authenticity of like who you are. People can just read right through that, especially in that kind of relationship. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
I think that also comes into play, if I may add, on like when you're building culture for your team as a leader as well, right? Like the more genuine culture that you can build is the one that replicates like who you are as a person. So there's actually a book that talks about that I really enjoy. It's called "What You Do Is Who You Are." So highly recommend those to read it if you're interested.
Yeah, it has this good multiplier effect where you being you but different from others is probably setting a culture for your team to be who they are as well.
Yeah.
Seeing that, wait, a different style can work too.
Yeah, that's a great call out. All right, so last question. So we have talked, I think, a lot about the value of representation and active allyship in leadership. And so as we end this discussion, I'd really love to hear, what are your commitments and actions that you're taking on in your own teams? What can others do to be driving diversity and inclusion? And not only as leaders, but really as stakeholders in their own companies.
I'll start one more time.
Go for it.
Being a smaller company, we can give people a lot of different projects with not as much as every single bullet, and hire people and take risks on them. And so what we're doing is giving people a shot, giving people projects, even if they're not as qualified as we'd want them to be, and trusting that they can own it and succeed, or maybe fail along the way and learn some important lessons. So if you have projects and you're not sure if someone can handle it, like, just try it and like give them the ownership and let them show you if they can't or if they can, and then they learn an important lesson. Like Pooja said, they learn from that and they grow. And that's something, a core value within Embrace is ownership. So that's kind of my message that I'll leave with.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm doing something similar where we have the idea of a tech lead, where an individual contributor is the tech lead for a project. The project can span multiple teams, multiple departments, and we realized after a few years of doing this that not all tech leads are set up for success, because you basically identifying some individual who's demonstrated some drive and success in the scope that they've handled, and then you're throwing them at a project which could be very different from what A, they're interested in, or B, that they've handled in the past. And so we came up with a list of, basically we documented what the expectations are. What does it mean to be a tech lead? Are you communicating? Are you flagging risks? Are you doing dependency management? Are you project managing? Exactly what does that mean? Who are your stakeholders? And so we wrote this list. It's something that I'm going to be sharing again. I'm doing a town hall next week with my team as a reminder of this is what it means. It's not to scare anybody, but hopefully more people will raise their hands, and it's going to be a transparent system. And then we also pair a junior tech lead with a senior tech lead so that they're not completely on their own. And we really don't want these projects to fail or these folks to fail, but then we also want them to be supported, and we want them to learn. And so I'm doing something similar with tech leads, with my hiring managers, with all the hiring managers. We've been doing this for 3 years now. We have at least one diverse interviewer in the loop. And in order to make sure that it's not the same set of people who are in that loop, I will sometimes reach out to interviewers from outside my group to help out with interviews, just to, again, spread the load out. And then I've also found that in my own group, there are some groups, some specific teams where we have more representation. And it's often because the leader there, for example, I have one team where the leader is Hispanic. His team has 50% representation in the Hispanic community. And so we use that as an example of, when you can see diversity, then when you see it, you can be it. And I see that play out. And so there are teams where they're like, wait, how do I hire the first female engineer? And like, okay, let's help you out. We do these things internally called job fairs, career fairs, where internally, you hire a bunch of people into Bloomberg, and then different teams go pitch their positions, and then they can choose which team they want to go join. And we will often take, the entire team, sometimes our product counterparts, and again, depending on who's speaking, we can see the results of, the applicants. And so we'll sometimes get the sister teams to help out, because sometimes hiring that first 1 or 2 people is the most difficult. And then, there's a little bit of chain reaction, and so that helps. And so it's getting every team bootstrapped, I think, that I'm focusing on.
For me is continuing participating with the groups at Datadog, but also for my team is making sure that we're building an environment where people not only we have people who actually are passionate about diversity and wanting to have representation, but also that we're building a safety environment where people can be themselves and express themselves who they are. Present issues and things like that, right? So that's been an area where I've been focusing on since I've joined the company for the last 2 years. Is let's build a culture where people feel safe. There's opportunities presented. We do a similar, not on the tech lead side, but on the management side, we have like team lead trials and things like that, right? So a lot of companies, the only way to move up in tech is to become a manager, but not everyone wants to do that. Luckily at Datadog, we have these 2 career paths that people can take. But there's still a moment in time where people are undecided, so we let them try it. And then no harm, no foul if they didn't work out or it's just not for them. And then they can continue growing their path. So just focusing on that.
Wonderful. So this is concluding our panel. I'm sad because I feel like I could talk to the 3 of you for a very long time, and I would feel even more fulfilled. But I'm really appreciative to you for taking the time, and also, helping me make noise, as we were talking about in a tech conference, and kind of, folding it into the broader offering. And so I'm really appreciative of our leaders taking the time, but also for all of you attending or tuning in live is really meaningful, and appreciate that this is a priority for you. So thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of Dash. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.